Hey everyone, Harold Fisher here, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR. Welcome to yet another edition of HUR at Home on WHUR.com and all of our social media platforms. Next month, WHUR will celebrate 50 years on the air, and that includes signature programming like the Daily Drum. This month on HUR at Home Newsmakers, I continue conversations with some of the people who have helped make it what it is. Joining the program are former anchor reporter Stephanie Gaines Bryant and former anchor reporter Derek McGinty. Stephanie and Derek, thank you both for joining the conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me start with you, Stephanie, for those who may not be familiar with you, because and certainly there are so many of our listeners and viewers who are. But how did you get to WHUR, to the news team?
I was working for another urban station in Market, the WHUR's competition. I was working with their morning show, and they fired the whole team, and except for me, and I knew my day was coming. So I called Hector Hannibal, who was the program director at the time. And he called me back, and the rest is history. I came over to HUR after conversation with Hector Hannibal.
Mm-hmm. And that was back in 1998. What was it like in 1998 when you came to the news team? And what were your responsibilities back then?
Well, for me, and to this day, because I've discussed this with many people, but it was a very, very fun time. HUR, it was like a family at the radio station. We laughed every day, even though my responsibility was doing the news. But I started out doing, I think, afternoon drives. Then in 2000, between 2000 and 2000, when I had just come back from maternity leave, I was given the Daily Drum, so became the permanent host of the Daily Drum. I think it was on 2005. But I remember every and it was very nice. It was like we were all family. It was a very family oriented place. I had never seen that quite that way before, and I haven't seen it quite that way since.
Yeah, I would imagine. I will say it still is, even with the evolution of the station and the evolution of the newsroom, it remains very much, like that. Same question for you, Derek. How did you come to the station when you started?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because at the time I was working for the now defunct United Press International. And I was, I'd never been on the air before. And I got a call from a friend of mine named Enid Doggett, who was a reporter at HUR at the time. And she said, "I'm about to leave here. You need to apply for my job." And I said, "Okay." And, kind of the rest was history. Now, at the time, you have to understand, HUR, this was 1984. So the news commitment was something that has not been seen since. We had like 11 people in the newsroom. That's all they did was news, including Kojo Nnamdi, Karen Campbell, Renee Nash. We had this huge news commitment that was just, it was the last days when radio could do that kind of thing. And so, that's where I gained so much experience. I covered Capitol Hill. I covered the district building. I covered Marion Barry getting busted at the Vista. I mean, it was so much news experience, and at that time they really kind of put me in position to do everything I've done since then.
So here's the thing, that when I was gone by the time Stephanie started, but when I started in 1987, in late 1987, my first day was with Derek. And you may not remember this, Derek, but my first day with you, we went to Capitol Hill, and that was in the midst of the Iran controversy.
Sure, absolutely.
And it was really exciting for me because the irony of all of that was that in some small way, it was like Watergate, which is the reason that I was first interested in doing this job in the first place, because the Watergate hearings interrupted my afternoon cartoons coming home from school. So, and so I was wondering, what is this stuff that was, interrupting that? And so that first day, and I've always said that you were one of the finest and most descriptive writers that that still to this day, some of the words that you used back then, I still use in my writing
Well,
today.
that's very nice to say, Harold. Thank you. I
And so
appreciate
I
it.
thank you for that. But Stephanie, what are the stories that you covered when you were working at HUR that still to this day still leave an impression on you?
I think the two biggest stories were 9/11. 9/11, we were on the air, Renee Nash and I and Herman, we were on the air for
You talking about
12
Herman?
hours straight, doing 9/11, September 11th, 2001. And we were on the air for 12 hours straight, in and out of the studio, giving the listeners updates on what was going on. And it was surreal. It was absolutely surreal that had happened in this country, and I was covering this in real time. And it was exhausting, but it just kind of shaped who I was and the seriousness of news. And it was just an incredible experience. The second thing that shaped me the most was the sniper shootings. I remember I was pregnant with my fourth child at that time, and we had heard that the sniper was going to shoot a pregnant woman next. And I remember holding my bed every time I went to a gas, thinking, when is this going to end? But that was also a very serious time, a very frightening time for the city of Washington, D.C. And I really, really was happy to be at the forefront of everything that was going on. Last but not least, the R. Kelly story was very big back then. Even though it took 20 years, I did a lot of Daily Drum shows on what was happening with the R. Kelly case. And it was so interesting. It is so interesting how tides have turned since. Back then, it was like, oh, why are you blaming him? He makes such great music. And just the whole country changed when it came to things like assault and how our young Black girls treat things. And just on, you could see just the social change, how people handled it back then compared to how it was handled recently.
For you, Derek, what stories left a lasting impression for you?
I could talk about a couple of things. I mean, obviously, that was the age of Marion Barry in the 80s, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time covering him. I spent a lot of time covering, and Renee Nash, who I'm sure confirmed this, was covering the trial of Marion Barry, and she went into labor while the trial was going.
Oh my!
So they called me and said, "Look, can you come down here and take over for Renee? Because she's done." So I ran down there, and took over for her, and she went off to have her first or second child. I mean, it was no joke, right? And so she had been doing a great job. I had to fill in for her covering that trial. But I mean, the whole age of Marion Barry was a defining time for Washington, D.C. And I got a chance to actually kind of in some ways get to know the guy, right? You know what I'm saying? Talk to him many, many times and kind of get a sense of who he was and why he acted like he acted and the things that it was fascinating. But one of the stories that I never forgot was the Catherine Fuller murder trial. And you may not remember this. This was a woman who was killed in a back alley, and a pole was shoved up her rectum. If I can, tell you that, it's pretty graphic, but that's what happened, and she was murdered. And they got these kids, the so-called 8th and H Street crew, and they were all convicted of murdering her. And there was later some contention that maybe they didn't really do it, but that's a whole different thing. And I just remember the sentencing of one of them. He was sentenced to 35 years to life, and his mother was there. And I remember I was at the sentencing, and it was over, and I was thinking, I got to get a comment from this woman whose son has just been sent away for 35 years to life. How can I even walk up to her and ask her this question? But I felt like I had to. So I walked up to her. I said, listen, this is who I identify myself, da-da-da. Do you have anything you'd like to say? And she said, I feel sorry for you that you have to come up and ask me a question like that. I was like, great, googly moogly. But I mean, what can you say, right? But but I never forgot that. And I always thought I did what I had to do. I had to ask, right? It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't nice, right? But you did what you had to do. And that was kind of part of the business of being a journalist.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look back at your time here, Stephanie, and look at the evolution of Black radio information and information that people of color consumed and are now consuming, what role do you believe the station is now playing, and the job that it's doing, and what may be its lasting legacy?
Well, of course, back then when I was at HUR, social media and what it is today. I mean, we were just kind of really heavily getting into cell phones, let alone social media, Facebook and Twitter and all of those wonderful things. And I'm hoping in this time of social media that radio stays relevant. Because of course, social media has taken over in a lot of ways for how people get their news. And there's a lot of, as you both know, there's a lot of misinformation that goes on as a result of that. So I'm hoping that it looks like we have, as we're doing this broadcast right now. That's something that couldn't have happened when I was at HUR. So the fact that HUR is staying current, doing things like streaming and stuff that hopefully that will help radio stay and not be something that you tune into in your car on the way to work, kind of thing.
Right. And what do you think? Same question, Derek. When you think about the kind of information that we were consuming, back then, how the Black community was getting their information, and how information has evolved, and the kind of information that people are now interested in. What do you think? The news department, the WHUR. What do you think the legacy is?
Frankly, I think the legacy is the opportunity and the training you gave to young journalists like you and me, Harold, like, Renee Nash, like Karen Campbell, like, Herman Washington, any number of us who came through there who had opportunities we otherwise would never have had to cover big stories. In 1988, WHUR sent reporters to the Democratic Convention in Atlanta and to the Republican Convention in New Orleans. And I went to both. There's no way that I do that if I'm not at WHUR, to get that opportunity to learn and be a part and just be able to say I was there. I talked to people. I asked the right questions. I tried to learn from the wrong questions that I asked. That kind of legacy, I think, is something you can't overlook.
Yeah, I think you're right. When I came back in 2007, I was brought back on a Wednesday, and on Thursday, Renee said there is an issue in Jena, Louisiana, regarding some Black boys at a high school in central Louisiana. Can you go? And I said, wow. Sure. We need you to be there on Saturday. 2 days later,
Right.
I said, okay. And then the next year I was in Denver for the Democratic National Convention, where this guy from some place like Chicago, Illinois, accepted the Democratic, the presidential nomination for his party, a guy named Barack Obama. And then I came back for 24 hours, and then I went to Minneapolis, St. Paul for McCain Palin, with literally 24 hours of rest. And you couldn't do it. And, Derek, you and I have extensive television experience. Even then, you did the network thing, but a lot of times we could not have even done that because there were so many other people who were taking trying to get a bite of that pie.
Right.
And you couldn't do it anywhere else unless you did it here. So it remains a very, very unique place. I want to thank you both, Stephanie Gaines Bryant and Derek McGinty, for sharing your memories and your thoughts. It's good to see you both. And I thank you for being a part of this Road to 50 conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having us, Harold. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Very good to talk to you, and the memories. And I have a son who is at Howard majoring in communications, and I hope he gets the same opportunities that I got and the same learning experiences that I got being at HUR.
Hey, look, if we can get him, if he comes by and he's wearing a mask, he'll be all right. Because that's where we are right now. But that's where we are. Derek McGinty, Stephanie Gaines Bryant, thank you again so much.
But
all
thank
right.
you.
See you later. Thank you.
And that is it for this edition of HUR at Home Newsmakers. I'm Harold Fisher. As always, I'll see you on the radio.